Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, I am joined by the mad scientist, the greatest of all time, some say, Mark Drury, for an absolute masterclass on the art of patterning bucks. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. It's good to be here. I'm very, very excited. We have got a great episode for you today, and it is kicking off a series. This has been the year of series. It's been a fun way to organize our months as we've gone throughout the year. And after killing my buck last week in Michigan, I spent some time thinking about what led to that success. What was I doing? What was I geeking out about? And it was really patterning. I was having so much fun looking at all the data, thinking through what are these deer doing and why are they doing it and where are they going to do it again and when are they going to do it again. And all of that was part of what led me to, hunting where I did and killing that buck the way that I did. And I got to thinking there's a whole lot more we could be discussing on this idea of patterning bucks. And the month of October is a great month to pattern a buck. So, October 2022 is the month of the pattern, and we're going to kick that off. If we don't include last week's, which was kind of like a soft kickoff, today the real kickoff of this month is this masterclass with Mark Drury. You should all know Mark. He's been on the podcast many times. He's one of the co-founders of Drury Outdoors, host of many different deer hunting TV shows. You can find him on the Deercast app, the Drury Outdoors YouTube channel, all over the place. And he is an absolute wealth of information. And there's two things that I think he specializes in, maybe three, but one of them is really dissecting and deep dive understanding how environmental and weather factors impact deer movement. We've talked to him several times deep on that topic. But another one that we haven't gone quite as deep on in the past is patterning deer, how he kind of collects and analyzes data about specific deer and then helps develop a pattern of what they're going to do and when they're going to do it so he can be there to get a shot when they do. And that is our topic today. We go into all facets of patterning deer, everything from how he collects the data to how he correlates different factors with his observations and pictures, all the way to how he chooses when to actually act on that stuff and try to take a shot at these deer. We talk early season patterning, we talk patterning during the rut, we talk late season, all sorts of stuff in between. This is a banger episode. And if you want to kill a deer this month in October, and shoot, even if you want to kill it in November or December, you're going to learn something today that will help you do it. I loved it. I think you will too. I want to give you a couple quick updates before I let you go. One, the final episode of my show, Deer Country, drops this week. So if you haven't yet, head on over to the Meat Eater YouTube channel and check out Deer Country. It is the 6-episode series that documented my hunts last year as I traveled the country, met with different regional experts, spent one day learning from them in their neck of the woods, and then I spent the next 3 days seeing if I could replicate their style in their general area and pull it off myself. This last episode was all about looking behind the curtain of how folks in the Midwest manage for big deer and actually, in this case, run an outfitting situation. Very interesting, very new kind of situation for me. Would love it if you could check it out. So that's number one. Number two, this is a big one. This week, if you are listening to this when we drop this episode is coming out October 13th, 2022. If you're listening on October 13th, 2022, or the next couple days afterwards, I want you to know that this week is Meat Eater's Whitetail Week. We got a whole lot of exciting stuff happening when it comes to whitetails at Meat Eater. One of them is First Light's Whitetail Sale. All of First Light's whitetail gear in Spectre is 20% off. 20% off any of that First Light whitetail stuff you might need. The Catalyst, the Solitude, the whatever. Check it out if you're in need of some last minute stuff. 20% off. Number two, Phelps Game Calls. It is the game call company that's part of Meat Eater, right? They've done duck calls, they've done elk calls, they've done turkey calls. This week they are launching deer calls. We've got a bunch of new grunt tubes, fawn distress call, bleat. I personally have really been liking and using the Beta Pro and the Alpha, I believe are the names of these two grunt tubes. I've gotten to test them so far this year. I really like the sound. There's some really good things with them. I'll get into more detail on these calls in the future, but just a heads up, Phelps has got new grunt tubes. If you need a grunt tube, this is worth checking out. More to come later. If you have been thinking about this kind of stuff, this is probably going to be one of the best opportunities you've got to do it to get it for cheap. So heads up on those type of things. There's several other deals from Timber Ninja. There's discounts on our whitetail logo wear. There's some deals from FHF. There's a lot going on. I don't want to drag this out anymore, but Meat Eater Whitetail Week is going on until October 16th. Head on over to themeateater.com. Go to the Meat Eater store. Go to firstlight.com. You're going to find it all there. Good stuff. And that's it for me. That's my only other update. We got a masterclass to get to, folks, so enough of me jabbering on. I love patterning bucks. I love this stuff. I love nerding out on the data, on what these deer were doing, on what they might do, on where I should be to maybe take advantage of it. It's so much fun. And Mark Drury is just one of my favorites. I love this guy. I love his approach. I have nothing else to say. Let's get to it. Mark Drury on the podcast. Masterclass, patterning bucks. 1, 2, 3, go. All right. Back with me, we have the great privilege of having Mr. Mark Drury on the show. Mark, thank you for coming back on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. How are you doing this morning, Mark?
I'm really good. I filled a buck tag in Michigan opening night. I went to Ohio and did some scouting yesterday, so I'm just basking in the glory of deer season.
Man, that picture of you and the family, I mean, that really put a smile on my face, and I know your smile is probably still there from that moment. That was pretty awesome, dude. It was the first time that the whole family could be together for that, and the first track job for my youngest son, my 2-year-old. So yeah, super cool. And it was funny, after we recovered that buck, we're all sitting there together, and my oldest son, Everett, he's 4, he kind of turns and looks at the family, and he shouts really loud. He says, "It's our first family buck." And I just loved it. And you know, that's a true statement. Yeah. Those bucks are, the family allows you the time and allows you to have the passion you allow, right? Or that you have. So that's a cool thing when they get who you are and embrace it. It's a beautiful thing. When they don't, it's a rough time for most hunters. Yeah. Because I've known guys like that, and I'm sure you do too, where the spouse or the children probably maybe get a little jealous over the time and the selfishness that we all have when it comes to this time of the year. So you're blessed to have a family that is aware of your passion and embraces it. Yeah, very, very, very true. Speaking of things worth celebrating, I saw that you had a pretty exciting night last night too, and probably late night. So I got to thank you again for hopping on the phone here this morning after what seemed like a pretty eventful night. Can you fill us in on what happened? Dude, it was such a cool day yesterday. I did an interview in the blind, and I had intel on a really nice deer that I was in on last night. Wade, which is the one you're referring to, I had intel on him, and Terry had intel on a giant. So all three of these deer, like 180 plus type deer.
Oh, wow.
And all three of us were on them. And I did this interview, and I told Perry, I said, I don't ever recall where we had intel and all three of us are on giants the same night. And I said, I feel really good somebody's going to kill. And I said, I think it's going to be Wade, because that buck, we had a cell picture of his going to bed that morning at 8:09, something like that. And he was heading south out of the field on a south wind, and the access to that spot is very good. In fact, I don't know if you recall the deer that I killed last year, December 20th. We called him the fork buck.
Yeah.
And he grossed a little over 190. Well, the last time that blind was sat was that night, December 20th. And then last night, and then Wade killed a 188 out of it. So
oh, wow.
the hit was just a little bit back, but quartering away. So I got opinions from Tracker John and Bobby Culbertson, the same two guys that are in deer cast track, giving me advice in there on track jobs. And we waited the appropriate time and then took up the trail. And you're right, it was a late night. The deer traveled about 500 or 600 yards, but we found him dead in his first bed on a really good blood trail. It went stomach, liver, lung, and the celebration began. And then of course, all the work begins. So I went to bed about 2:30, and I still saw 3:00 last night, and then I woke up this morning about 6:30, the normal time. So it was a short night, but you know what? That's what we do, and we love it. We live for those nights.
Yes.
We live for those no sleep nights.
Yep.
Who cares about a night where you get 7 or 8 hours? I'll take those 3-hour nights every time.
That's the good problem to have right there. You want to have reason to miss sleep this time of year. Big time.
And it was Wade's biggest deer. It was a mainframe 8-point, and it had 10 kickers, so it had 18 total scorable points. It was a 6.5-year-old deer. And the cool thing about this deer, and it really kind of blends into what we're talking about today, when this deer was 4.5 in 2020, I had a few pictures of him scattered throughout the fall on this tract of ground. This farm is about 417 acres. It's right on a major highway. I lose deer to the highway. And I had a sprinkling of pictures. So I didn't consider him like one of those deer. You know how it is. You get them every day and you're like, it's a homeboy. I never considered him a homeboy. Last year, and that year, he was probably 100 and high 30s type 8-point. But he wore it well. He had that wide frame. Last year, he was probably high 40s, low 50s. Had him all summer. I got one hard horn pick, and he vanished. I mean, gone. And all year, I kept waiting to get a picture of him. Had more cameras out, couldn't get him. And all of a sudden, late December, he shows back up. And I was like, that son of a gun. He left the entire fall, at least presumably left. I didn't have photography of him. We hunted the farm a good bit. That was where the fork buck lived. And I never saw the buck, never encountered him. I just assumed he was dead from the highway or another hunter. There's a lot of pressure around that farm. And then he shows back up late December. So this summer, when he showed up in velvet, we knew he was a giant, right away. I guessed the deer in the 180 somewhere. And I'm like, oh, that's the deer that disappeared last year. And, this year he shed his velvet. I got more pictures, and I'm like, he's sticking around. But in my heart, I was like, this deer's going to, again, transfer to a fall range, in my opinion, which I eventually talked to a gentleman that had the buck all fall, and they passed him because he was an 8-point and they were on a different target deer. That farm is probably a mile and a half east of mine. So my assumption was he was again going to switch home ranges this year, or fall ranges. And that's why when he stuck around, we made an extra effort to get on him with cell cams, and the food plots that he was using went back to when he was 4, researched where he was the most, and ended up killing him in one of those 2 fields where he was at the most when he was there during this period. So it really speaks to exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How patternable they can be when their home range overlays from one year to the next. They really do a lot of the same things. So
yeah, so this is a great example, and maybe we can kind of dial in on a few things with this story. You know, the focus I really am hoping to dive into is just everything on how you pattern these bucks, Mark. And the first thing I'm wondering with a buck like this or any deer, when do you start the patterning process? Like, when does a buck show up on your radar and you say, okay, this is when we have to, you know, we're going to label him as X, or we're going to create a folder, or we're going to, you know, when does that start? Are these 2-year-old bucks? Are they 3-year-old bucks? Like, when does the file start getting developed?
You know, I have a lot of trail cameras, as you know, and I run probably 90 cells and another 150 normal Reconyx cameras annually. Now, that's across 3 states. It's across a lot of different farms and leases and so on and so forth. And I will answer that question by this. I have a file of photos that starts in 2007 that includes every racked buck I've ever taken a photo of, and every photo of that racked buck from the time that they're 2.5 until they disappear or we kill them or whatever. So I try to start putting a pattern on them the moment they have a decent rack. And if it's a 1.5 years old that shows real promise, you know, I don't keep spikes and forkhorns and 6 points and that type of stuff. But if it's a 1.5 years that shows real promise, I keep files on them as well. So, you know, my entire fall is just swallowed up looking at photography. I don't know how many pictures I'm at now. I mean, I used to always feel like I was at 1 million, but I'll bet you I'm 1.5 to 2 million photos annually. Of that, I'll keep maybe 100,000, and I've got those all stored in my computer and in hard drives from 2007 through present day.
Oh, that's a lot. I've got like 9 different directions we could go with this, and I'm not sure where I want to. I'm like the child that's addicted to candy that goes to Willy Wonka's candy shop, you know, and just sees everything all around him that he wants to have. This is like the thing I nerd out about the most too. So I guess let's just jump into something you just said right there, which was you have 100,000 pictures that you might be keeping, and you are keeping photos of bucks from the time they're noticeably, you know, unique. So maybe oftentimes that's 2.5 years old. When you get a deer like this one that Wade was on, and you realize, okay, this was a buck that, you know, we noticed last year, we passed him. Now this year he's back, and he's definitely a buck we want to shoot. How do you go about sorting through everything you had? Like, how do you find all the past pictures of his? How do you have it organized so you can then see, okay, here's all the photos of this buck. Here's the way I'm going to think through pictures from last year versus this year. How are you able to find it, compile it in a way you can actually analyze and then make decisions from, given the fact that you have just so much out there already to sort through? I guess my big question is, how do you sort through and find the most important pieces within a hay pile?
It is a hay pile because it's a time-consuming deal to go through and find him again. Because I have in Iowa, I probably have 50 different locations within Reconyx Buckview. That's the program I've used since 2007, and it has served me quite well. So I would designate a farm, call it this farm, for instance, call it the 257. All right. Because this tract was 257. I bought it, and it attached it to a 160 that I own. So now it's a 417, but this particular piece was 257 acres. So I have it in there as the 257. I have the long bottom file. I have 257 Ridge. I've got every different camera on that farm labeled accordingly. And then as I look at the cards and as I look at the pictures, I am shuffling them into all those different files. So I can go back, to 13, 14, 15, whatever year it is, and look at that particular camera area and see how the deer moved. And then I can start finding that buck once he appeared within that farm and find out what days he daylighted, when he was there, so on and so forth. So I don't then peel him out and create a file on him. Sometimes I do, but that's not the file I'm looking at. I'm looking at all the other aspects that might affect a deer's movement during daylight. So I'm looking for other deer. I have notes within DeerCast, our app, as to what the crop rotation was on that field or in that area, not only on my farm, but on the outlying farms. I have files of the weather data from those years, so that if I find a daylight picture, call it when he was 4.5 years old in 2020, and I find 2 or 3 in a row, I can go back and research what was the weather like, what was the food like, what was the mass crop like, what was the rainfall like, and then start to put together why he did what he did. So it's data at a fairly high level, but that's how we're killing them. And I do these deep dives when we get a target buck. I go backwards in my file. So that's why it's important that I keep every single rack buck photo, because you're building that buck's history and that buck's life. And then if he stays around, and if he gets to 5 or 6, and if he becomes a target, which by and large most do not, they fall off the map at age 3, age 4, through time. You lose a lot, or they're there here today, gone tomorrow. They're on a walkabout outside of their home range. You get pictures, and I keep them just in case they walk about again. But a deer that is a semi-homeboy like this, I had some pretty good data points that I could go back on and figure him out. So, and he really wasn't that hard to figure out, because he was so confined to 2 spots that were in both years. Were bean fields. Actually, in 2020, he was on a bean field that I did a green to green transfer, and then he did it again this year, and that's where he killed him. The other field where Wade encountered him at the other night, which is only about 200 yards from where he killed him, is a big ridge field that they love to go bed on this north face on hot days. That's the other thing I learned about the farm and then this buck. And right below that, there was a big giant bean field in 20, and it's beans again this year. So, perhaps the crop rotation had something to do with it. It was also a good acorn year in 20 and 22. So all of those things come into play when it comes time to kill a deer. So it's not about the deer always. It's also about the environment. And that's one of the reasons we did the things we did within DeerCast. We've always had the predictive model. We extended that to 14 days this year, but this year we came up with our mapping solutions. Well, within that, we have the wind, and we have mass crop, and we have overall rain with our rain stations, all the things that people really need to focus in on, I think, to help them take their game to the next level. So, there's better mapping solutions out there, in my opinion. I think there's apps with better maps, but I don't think there's any out there with better tools to help you kill a whitetail than what DeerCast is. We stayed in our lane and focused directly on the whitetail deer and the hunter and the environment that they live in.
Yeah, this is some pretty cool stuff. I love that rain gauge feature. That one just jumped out to me as, gosh, I would die to have that kind of information for over the years with food plots and whatnot.
Exactly. Like it's so important to not only like our success, like, okay, basics. I put the seed in the ground. I don't get rain. It doesn't grow. I put the seed in the ground. I get 0.2 of an inch of rain. The seed swells. It doesn't grow. I get a 2-inch rain. Holy cow. I've got the best looking food plot I've ever had. So that the way we look at it, on the surface is like, that's important to my success. Well, what happened in April, May, and June that this deer grew 45 inches versus the last 2 years when he was a 140 and a 150, and now all of a sudden this year he's 188. Well, guess what? We had a wet spring. What happened 5 years ago? We had a wet spring, and when he was a fawn, he was off to a good start because we had a tremendous acorn crop that year. So rainfall is so important to the overall health of the herd. What happens when we don't get the right amount of rainfall here at the right times of the year? All of a sudden you have EHD. And that affects overall daylight pictures and overall daylight movement. So I think outside of just the trail photos that you keep, the notes you keep about your environment also help you put patterns together through the decades. Because as things occur now, Terry and I have been hunting long enough. I'm 55. I started hunting when I was 15. Terry's 65. Well, we've seen many falls come and go. We've seen great acorn crops. We've seen terrible ones. We've seen crops fail. We've seen them succeed to the point that they're 200 bushel corn and, 70 bushel beans. We've seen it all before. So therefore, when it repeats, we have a better understanding of how to succeed. And a lot of this is mental notes, but a lot of it is written notes and stuff that I've journaled through the years about what happened when the weather was like this. And that's how we came up with the algorithm for DeerCast. So it's just really paying attention to every detail, but it's going to be a time suck for you if you want to take it to that level. Like it's almost 24/7 throughout the entire fall to really hone in on all these different things I'm talking about, because the environment and the food sources are just as important to the deer, ultimately his health and how he's going to move, daylight versus nighttime that year. There's a lot of different factors that to plug in on.
Yeah, you really got to love it. I was 2 nights before opening day here in Michigan. I was sitting at like 11 o'clock at night at my computer, and I had both monitors up, and I had a spreadsheet with all of my daylight trail camera photos of my main target buck and all the different weather factors, yada, 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 all the different data points there. Then I had a note document open where I had listed out everything this buck had done in 2021 within like a 10-day window of opening day, and then I had everything he'd done this year so far for the last 3 weeks, and then I had notes on the 2 locations I was considering and what other deer had been in there last year and this year. And I was looking at all this stuff, and I'm having the time of my life, and I texted some of my buddies in my group chat, and they're like, "Oh my God, that looks miserable. You're a nut job." And in my head, I thought, this is the best part of it. This is the best. You really got to love that.
I agree. I love data, and I love stats, and it's pretty cool because they are patternable, but you got to have the pieces of the pie to pattern them.
Yeah. So you mentioned, keeping track of the environmental factors and all the other things outside of just pictures. And this is one thing that I have struggled with actually over the years and not done a good enough job of. That is like keeping track of all of those outside things. I've started and stopped multiple hunting journals where every year I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep track of everything, and I do it for a few days or a few weeks, and then I lose it. What does that look like for you? Do you keep a consistent journal? Do you track stuff just during the hunting season, or are you writing something down online or in a book, or how do you personally do that?
I keep a lot of notes within DeerCast because we allow for it, within the different waypoints and whatnot. But a lot of it is honestly in my mind. Like, I don't know. I think I was lucky that I have a mind that, like, I think it's because I'm so hyper-focused on killing them. Like, I know how important it is, so therefore I remember it, if that makes sense. Like, I can't remember. My wife can bring up 10 subjects in a row, and I'll have barely a memory of any of them. But when it comes to a deer, the barometric pressure, the wind speed, the wind direction, I mean, there's not a deer I've ever killed that I couldn't spit it out if you ask me. I've been very lucky to have it. And again, I think that's probably a selfishness on my part because I'm so obsessed with them.
Right.
So a lot of it is just memory.
I can't say I have that same memory, so I'm jealous of that. I've got to figure out a better way to lock this stuff down on paper. We'll see if this is the year I can finally do a better job of it. Here's something I'm curious about. Historical weather data, right? That's something that, of course, you've mentioned as being something you like to take a look at and see, how it correlates with daylight pictures in the past or daylight observations. This is a 2-part question, and one part maybe you don't want to answer, and if you don't want to answer, you don't need to. Second part, you can tell me. But part A is, can we get historical weather data in DeerCast someday? Because I would love it if I could see that right in my DeerCast app versus having to go to a different website. So that's part A. And then part 2 is, where do you personally go to get your historical weather data?
I've created my own. Okay, so 2 answers. DeerCast looks at the future and the past. Okay, so on a daily basis, if it's giving you a prediction, it's looking backwards and it's looking forward. So say you wanted to rewind the clock 5 years, it would have to look backwards several days and look forward several days to recreate the prediction for that day. That was an algorithm and a cost of an API that was cost prohibitive by, not by a little, but by a lot. Like puts you out of business. You know, when we ask the question, can we do this? Because we have an API, like weather is for the most part a predictive model in and of itself. So the API comes in, we pipe that into our algorithm, and it all works, right? Because it's all recent. It's all right there in their computers. To go back and dig it up was, they're like, well, no one's ever asked for that before, you know, and in other words, it was impossible. And the quote was cost prohibitive. So I do it myself. I screenshot my deer cast every day and I keep a file, and I have since it came out. So I've got every day's weather data for where I hunt since the start of it. So
wow,
that's the best way to do it.
Okay. Well,
because then it's all there. If you look at our screen, everything you want to know is all on that hourly forecast.
Right.
Put it at noon, or put it at 8 a.m. or 6 p.m. and screenshot it. And you've got every single readout you want. But going back and doing it is just absolutely cost prohibitive.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I can dream, I guess.
and it's cost prohibitive because of how many days equal into the prediction for that moment, right? We're giving you an hour by hour forecast, but in reality, it's looking forward and looking backwards to give you that hour. And then if you wanted to rewind the clock 5 years, it's so tangled up you can't do it.
Yeah, that's a doozy. Well, back to pictures then. One of the things you don't want to spend a ton of time on, but I do want to just run by you real quick. We've had previous conversations over the years about how you use trail cameras, how you place them, when you're checking them, when you're moving them, stuff like that. But when it comes specifically to patterning bucks, like not just getting a basic inventory in the summer, not just trying to get, what's around, but when you are actively trying to pattern a specific buck, like this deer, for example, that Wade just killed, when he showed back up and you realized, oh, wow, we've got a chance at this deer, but we got to figure him out ASAP before he disappears. How does your camera placement change, if at all, in that kind of situation when you're like, we need to learn this deer and put together a pattern now? Do things change, or do you always have your cameras in the same places and they just stay there?
There are historical cameras everywhere that stay there, that are on great travel routes or hub scrapes or places. When you watch a farm or watch a field and you're hunting it, you go, I need a camera right there. And then it always produces for you, and you watch a certain food plot and that's got 80% of the movement. The rest of the plot's got 20, right? So, but then when we find a target, then we might go from 3 broad looking cameras in that area to 10. I call it the blitzkrieg with cams. Mm-hmm. So, you go in, you're trying to win the war, right? Everybody knows from history the term blitzkrieg. Yep. Well, you're going in there, you got to be wise about it. You can't run him out of there. Got to be smart, get as much intel as you can. And, 6-7 years ago, before the advent of the cell cams, you didn't have real-time information. Now you do. So my methods have changed from strictly looking at historical patterns and trying to predict the future to that coupled with real-time in the now information through cell cams. And it's I can tell you those cell cams are a deadly tool when coupled with historical information from a file that you've kept on a deer. It is a 1-2 punch that is unbeatable for mature bucks. Yeah. Particularly in phases like this one on greener pastures. We're in phase 2 from our show 13, and they're just not moving very far. If you put a buck to bed and you've got a decent deer cast prediction that afternoon, chances are you're going to see him.
When you do this blitzkrieg and you go and you increase the concentration of cameras, what are the kinds of places you're going to place those extra cameras, and how are you doing it so that you don't mess up your chances of still seeing him? What's the best way to do that in a low impact way where you get enough information that's relevant but not so much so that you never see him again?
It changes throughout the year. This time of the year, they're not moving very far because they're on food source. They haven't started expanding their home range hardly at all. and I'm on entry and exit trails in and around a food source that I'm trying to take the deer, or I'm on an acorn flat that has a bunch of, acorns falling. And I'm trying to figure out where he's coming from, where he's bedding. I probably have an idea based on historical, hunting of the farm. And I'm trying to kill him in and around that food source of an afternoon. Unless by chance I get a strong north wind, then I'll try him of a morning. First north is always golden. We've talked about that before on your podcast. I love the first morning the wind's out of the north. Tomorrow morning is that for us here. So if we don't have too many cocktails when Matt gets here tonight, we might have the morning. If not, we'll be out there tomorrow afternoon. But I love that. Now that will change as you get into late October. Then I'm on scrapes, man. I've got every scrape covered that I can find in what I anticipate to be his home core. And then suddenly, instead of the blitzkrieg being very concentrated on a small area, it expands as I anticipate the home range is going to expand. In other words, Wade's deer was fairly consistent, 200 yards apart, two major fields. He was daylighting on both of them in the evenings. Very rare for a 6.5-year-old deer to do. But you get into late October, all of a sudden that home range is going to expand, and you got to have a lot more scrapes covered to figure out where he's going to be, because that's what he's hitting at that time. Right now, he's hitting food source. Late October, early November, he's hitting scrapes. Get back through the rut, then I'm on just where the heck is he going to be? It's a lot of randomness, so I'm on trails oftentimes then. And then late November, I'm back into scrapes and food sources. So, as we transition through the season, these light switch events that we talk about in 13 and in deer season 22, then, you can adjust your tactics. And all of this is laid out in DeerCast. Like we break these phases down, as deeply as we can to help people understand what the deer are doing at different times of the year. Well, if you adjust your camera strategy to what they're doing, you're going to be so much more effective. If you find a target buck, put a lot of cameras on him, you're going to up your odds for killing him. Yeah. Certainly seeing him, possibly killing him.
Where does glassing or observation fit into your data kind of mix these days? Is that something you do much still, or with the advent of cell cams, do you not need to do that as much?
I still do a lot, because a camera only shows you one little spot, right? Like they tell you a lot, but they also don't tell you a lot, if you will. And that gets especially true in terrain and country that is more difficult to anticipate and interpret. In other words, like big open country throws hunters for a curve because they can be anywhere, everywhere, tall grass, big swampy areas. It's all the same, all flat, river bottoms, big CRP expanses, big tillable, those types of examples where it's really, really big cover. They oftentimes are much more random within and therefore much more difficult to pattern. Contrast that with where we were last night, brushy, heavy security cover, food right next to it. He's not moving very far. He's got bed, he's got food, he's got water. When that gets big, it's much more difficult to pattern them. So I spread out and I watch that oftentimes as opposed to depend on cell cams. Sometimes cell cams or cameras in general will almost lock you into a pattern and handcuff you or put you in a straitjacket to where you can't make a good decision. And sometimes you got to get back out there, put eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, and figure it out that way. So it really depends on the environment that I'm dealing with.
Yeah. And like, when would you do that kind of thing? Is that like, let's say you're in an environment or a situation where you realize, like, I need this additional intel. I need to go out and watch. Are you just doing that on the nights when the conditions aren't right to actually go in for a strike and for a kill? And you're like, well, there's not a great opportunity to kill something right now, so I'm going to sit back and watch? Or are you doing this every morning in October when you're not hunting? Or what does that actually look like?
You hit two nails on the head. Both of those examples are exactly when I do it. And then I do it when the camera reports and the cell cams have me scratching my head. In other words, like, this buck was here last year, but I'm not getting him this year. Did he switch to one part of the field? As bucks age, that's another part of the equation and another part of patterning a deer. What they do at age 3 varies differently from 4 or 5. And then when they get to 6 or 7, suddenly things start to shrink. If you took a circle and it would be very large at age 3, it slowly but surely shrinks as a deer ages. You get him to 6, 7, or 8. If you could find where he's at, you could kill him because he's not moving very far. They get slow, their metabolism slows way down, they get almost a little bit lazy. I oftentimes use an analogy of an older pet, an older dog. As you watch them age through life, take a cat, that's, age 1 or 2, that thing's bouncing off the walls half the day,
Yeah.
By the time that cat's 10 or 12, it's laying around sleeping all day. And dogs are very much the same, puppy versus, a dog that's 10, 11, or 12. And deer are the exact same way. So you have to always keep in mind, what age is he and what are his mannerisms going to be like? And am I off of him just a little bit? Is he here, but my cameras aren't seeing him? I need to go watch from afar if it's possible and perhaps try to find him. And that has worked many times for me. So it really comes down to the environment and the age of the deer.
Okay. Now,
and the weather, right? Like, we're in this terrible pattern 2 years in a row of these. Every day it's 10 degrees above normal temperatures. I don't know if it's like that for you up in Michigan, but it has been for us here.
Yeah.
And it's like the La Nina force that's out in the Pacific has set a new normal to the deer movement. What used to be a pour on deer cast is now really an okay, because the deer have adjusted to these warmer temperatures. That's going to switch in March or April when it turns over to an El Nino, but the La Nina has really smoked us here in the Midwest, both in overall rainfall and overall average temperature the last couple of seasons. And we've gone through these before, in years past, so we kind of know how to adjust to it. Have you been above norm there where you live?
It's been pretty warm throughout the summer, yeah. We're in a little bit of a better place the last, 7, 8, 9, 10 days. It's finally kind of dropped down. Finally
got to normal, right?
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
So now normal is the new cold front. It has been for the last seasons. It's crazy, and that's all through that La Nina's effect on us out there in the Pacific. It has a huge effect on overall environment, rainfall, and thus deer movement.
That's interesting.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Arts Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
This situation in which we realize that we need to get more intel and we need to go out and actually watch. The perfect situation, I think, is where you can drive to somewhere and sit in your truck and glass from a hill, let's say. Super safe, great view. You've got an opening you can look down into. That sounds easy, like that's an easy option. But what about a situation where you don't have that hill that you can safely get up on top of, and if you wanted to learn more about what this deer is doing, you would have to get in there and climb up into a tree or something. Do you ever do that kind of thing anymore, like an actual observation sit? And if so, how do you do that in a way that you feel confident you can get the intel you need without damaging things? Is that, what's your thoughts on that?
I absolutely do it. And I did it on the night of October 2nd. I was sharing that story with you before we started recording. There was a buck that I had pictures of on a brand new spot. And, I went in there. We have a blind kind of set up where we think we can kill him, but we're also like, we're probably going to have to move this or go to a different tree or whatever. So let's go have a sit there and see if we see him. And what do you know? He walks in 25 yards, and I goofed the whole situation up, and I don't even get my bow drawn because I was in a bad position. I kind of had my head out of the game, and I got very excited very quickly, and I really, really botched it up and screwed up on a really big deer. But I was doing it that night. So I do a lot of observation sits. And I think one of those situations would be, like say it's a big timber track and it's just lots of timber and the deer are in there, but outside of camera photos, or you're not going to observe that timber because you can't see in there. You've just got to be very wise about the days you'll go in there and where you're going to sit and how you're going to set up. Like I love high pressure days, give me 30.1 and rising. And I feel much more confident going into a timber and affecting less than on a 29.8 with cloud cover and swirly winds where you're going to affect a lot of stuff. So be wise about the weather conditions when you choose to go do it, and be wise about your access and then affect less. I don't walk and scout a tremendous amount during the season. I do all of that in the off season. I walk the leather off the bottom of the shoes, shed hunting and the off season. But come season, I am really cautious about getting in there and scouting an area unless the weather is just absolutely pristine and perfect, because I think the worst thing you can do as a hunter is bounce a deer out of where you're trying to kill him. I mean, unless you just don't care, unless you're, I'm not in it trying to pattern a buck. I'm in it to go enjoy myself, and I want to go cover some ground on this tract of ground today and see what the deer sign looks like and jump in a tree saddle and see if I kill one. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. The great thing about deer hunting, there's a lot of different techniques where you can kill them. My personal technique and my personal desire is to never affect the deer and try not to let them know they're being hunted. That's because that's worked for me in the past. So therefore I'm very cautious about those days that I'll go do that technique where I'm actually trying to gain intel by going into their world, if you will.
Yeah. So when you're doing an observation sit or you're glassing, what specifically, and I'm sure the answer is everything, but I guess I'm looking for a little bit more nuance as far as what specifically are you looking for? Like, what are the things, like you sit, you see the buck pop out, in your mind, what are the key data points that you need to preserve from that observation? And how do you then do that? So you see the buck, let's say. Do you go home? Do you go pull up DeerCast and put in the notes like, okay, I saw him and he came from here and he did X and all that? Or how do you take advantage of a sighting and squeeze that for as much as possible? Maybe that's what I'm getting at.
It definitely goes back into that overall data bank, if you will, of what's the crop rotation? What phase are we in? What time of the year is it? What is the weather like today? What made him move during daylight? Where did he come from? Where is he going? It's really as simple as what I just said right there. Where did he bed? Where is he heading to feed? Or if it's a later, and I'm speaking in terms of where I'm at right now in the season, which is, early October, and they're on food patterns. That's going to change drastically coming up here because the home ranges are going to expand. And then in November, it's, they bar the door. They're all over the dadgum place. So all of those different factors have to be either journaled or remembered or put into that overall data bank of your personal deer memory / history / predictive model, whatever that is for you as a person. It has to be documented some way so that you can, in 8 years, 10 years, 7 years, go back, not necessarily to reflect on that deer, but reflect on what the deer in general do with those conditions when they repeat. Because when weather conditions repeat and mass crop repeats and crop rotation repeats, the deer in general will most likely act and bed the same way that they are when you made that observation.
Yeah. So something you said there made me, it triggered a situation that I've oftentimes found myself in wondering about. And I think it's tied to this kind of observation type situation where you see a deer do something, and then you think about, okay, what was the wind doing at that particular time, and why did he come from where he came from, and why was he going where he was going? One of the dilemmas I oftentimes find myself is that I'm looking at a daylight photo, or I'm looking at some piece of data that says, okay, that buck was in here on this day. What was the wind, that day? And I'll say, okay, it was northwest or whatever. But then maybe it was different in the morning versus the evening. And I guess I'm curious, what do you think matters more when it comes to like predicting what a buck's going to do? Is the wind in the morning when he went back to bed the most important thing to predict what he's going to do? Or is it the wind in the evening when he comes out to his food source? Like, which is influencing his behavior more? I don't know if I'm explaining this question well. Does that make sense, Mark?
Are you talking in terms of speed or direction? I
was thinking direction, but both would be interesting.
Wind speed is what I pay most attention to. I pay almost no attention to wind direction as it pertains to a buck's patternable and predictive movements as much as I do speed. I am not one that conforms to the thought that direction of wind will dictate a lot for a deer. I'm sure it does, but I don't think it's as important as I think some people think it is, if that makes sense. That's just based on my observations. I'm much more interested in the speed and his overall demeanor, which I think speed has a great deal to do with, than I am the direction of the wind.
So tell me a little bit more about that then. So if the speed is really what might be influencing, I mean, are you saying it might influence whether or not a buck were to come out in daylight again, or if, he's going to be more active?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's combined with a lot of other weather factors. And when a lot of them optimize, that's when you see those magical days. It's like, holy shit, I saw 3 shooters tonight, or I saw 30 deer, but the other night I sat this same place and I saw 3 deer. And, a lot of things were similar, but all of a sudden when several things optimize, like we're about to do that tomorrow and the next day, at least here in the Midwest, there's a bunch of weather factors that are optimizing. And we're very anxious for this next 3 or 4 day period here.
Can you, in a way that won't, give away too much information, would you be willing to walk me through, how you're going to take advantage of this optimal set of conditions and how you are going to, pattern or try to take advantage of a pattern that you've been developing with a buck of your own? Is there an example you could share of like, this is what he's done in the history, this is what the pictures tell me now, this is how this lines up with the current weather pattern? And is there a case study that we have here that might work to discuss?
No, because three of the I shouldn't answer it that way. Yes, there is, but in this instance, 3 of the bucks that I'm hunting are bucks that don't home core on my farms. Like I'm waiting for them to show, and then I'm going to go hunt them, and none of them are on there right now. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, because I hunt a lot of small parcels, and therefore I'm just off oftentimes. So I got to wait for them to come in. So in direct answer to your question, and then the other one that I'm hunting, I've really got 4 targets that I'm hunting this year, and the other one I think does live there a lot. However, the wind direction is completely wrong to hunt him over the next few days. So that's why my simple answer was no in terms of who I'm hunting right now. However, Matt's in, Perry's got a tag, so there are other bucks that I think are going to play quite well through these conditions, and that's looking at historical data. They're bucks that have been there their lives, and the conditions are lining up. If we can put them to bed, we should see them and possibly kill them. It's exactly what we did last night with Wade's. So, and the reason I say that is because I've had many days over the past 10 days where I've had a buck early morning on a cell cam and go, no, he's not coming out tonight. The weather conditions aren't right. I don't think he's going to daylight tonight, and therefore we choose not to go in there. And more often than not, he did not. That's going to change here with this weather front. We're going to be below normal temperatures. We've got cold north winds, and these weather fronts, I will say that through La Nina, when you get them, they're that much more important because we get so few. When you get one, holy cow, man, they're all on their damn feet, and they're moving a little bit further. They're moving earlier. They're moving a little farther. It's pretty cool what's about to happen here in the Midwest.
So that raises another question then. We've got maybe 3 main categories of data, I guess you could say, that might help us make a decision. One of those categories is historical data, so past sightings, past pictures. The next thing is like our recent intel. So what our cell cameras are telling us right now, or what does the regular camera that we checked within the last few days tell us right now? That's the second category. And the third category is all of the weather, condition, environment type stuff that might impact something. Now that we have that recent, now that cell cameras have entered the picture, how has that changed the value of one of those different categories? So is historical patterns, is that less important now because you've got this recent intel, or is it still on equal plane? Is it an equal playing field?
It just makes it that much more effective and validates what your assumptions are much quicker for you, right? Or invalidates, right? So Reconics has a saying, see what you've been missing. Well, cell cams also tell you what you haven't been missing. Like I've got shooters that we had summer intel on that I have anticipated to show up on certain farms that they just haven't yet. So it tells you not to go there until they do. So the fourth piece to that, you named 3 very important ones. I would divide the weather and the environment literally into those 2 categories. So weather data, yes, and then environment, which I always look at crop rotation and mass crops. So food source, weather's going to affect how they feed, what's planted where, and what the mass crop is going to affect where they feed. So those 2 things in combination can help you get ahead of where he's going to be as opposed to behind.
Yeah. What about when some of these things conflict? So what if you have what if the weather is lousy, if it's not as good as it should be, but you have a 2-year in a row kind of annual pattern that this buck always starts cruising through here the last week of October, and he's been rock solid here, going crazy the 25th through the 30th the last 2 years. Now that arrives this year, and you're just not loving the weather, but that historically he's been moving in daylight during that time period. In that kind of example, or some other example where 2 or 3 of these different things don't all line up, which do you trust? Like, do you always fall back and say, well, history says he's going to start moving through here, so I got to give it a shot, or do you now wait until the cell cameras confirm it, irrefutably?
It depends on the time of the year. So in answer to that question, if it's 25th through the 30th, I'm hunting him whether it's great weather or not, because his testosterone's at a level, it's going to kind of trump the weather a little bit. You don't need nearly as great a weather to kill them then as you do now when they're in a food pattern and moving 100 yards from their bed to their feed each day. Even though it's less of a distance, it takes much better conditions for them to daylight. And I'm speaking in terms of older deer. That doesn't mean that a 1.5 or 2.5 won't do it. But if you're hunting a 5 or 6-year-old deer, man, things better be awfully perfect to get that sucker up and see him during daylight, because they're walking slow. They stand up, they stretch, they browse around. They're just late moving during daylight, and it's very difficult to get close enough to see a deer of age 6 of an evening or of a morning. It's extremely difficult to get in that short period or short distance that they're going to move during daylight. It's much easier to do so in late October, earlier November, when the distance increases and when testosterone is higher and they're actually moving better. They just move better. This time of the year, they're finicky, man. It's got to be all systems have to be green light to really expect to see a deer of that age class. So I answered that a little long, but I believe that's the correct answer to your question.
Yeah, I follow you. kind of back to the annual pattern thing. One other thing I'm curious about how cell cameras have, I guess you kind of said it. Sometimes they confirm what you believe, or you confirm your assumptions. But how has your thoughts on annual patterns evolved over the years, especially now that maybe we can confirm them or disprove them more accurately? Do you still see this to be a pretty consistent thing that you can plan on, and how tight of a repeat have you now seen things to be? Do you look at this and think, man, if they did it the last year, they're likely to do it again on the same day, the same week, the same condition? Like, what? I guess, give me more annual patterns.
I hear you, and I get where you're going. And yes, I still believe that with every fiber of my being. However, there are factors that affect it slightly. And I've mentioned it a few times in our conversation, the environment with mass crop and overall, crop rotation affects it. Cover affects it. A farmer cutting a field one year. Here's a great example. Brush got out of control on a CRP farm, and that's where the buck was bedding. And FSA got on that farmer's tail and said, "You've got to clean that brush off of there." Last year it was all 6 foot tall. This year it is 7 inches tall.
Yeah.
Those types of factors affect deer's bed and behavior greatly. So your overall awareness to your environment is just as important to the patterning of a deer as it is sitting in a computer and writing down all your notes and then looking at the notes and then looking backwards. Like, I always say why, no matter whether it's a picture or a sighting or anything else. Why is he doing what he's doing today? Whether that be direction of travel, whether that be moving, whether that be not moving, whether that be a neighbor saying, "Hey, I just saw this certain deer," and you go, "Wait a minute, that's a deer I'm hunting over here." I always go, why? What made things happen? Whether that be something that happened consistently or whether it's something that changed. So yes, I believe it with every fiber of my being, but you also have to be very nimble in the moment to accept change and go, dang it, my plan that I made in July and August is not coming to fruition. Why is it not coming to fruition? I had all this laid out, man. I was going to kill him on October the 5th. Well, why aren't you killing him? There's reasons, because it's the chess match that I think people get so addicted to. So if you figure out the whys, and the more the whys that you figure out, the more deer and the more mature deer you're going to kill.
Yeah. So let's go back to a little bit of the, the analyzing of all this data. So there's these different categories of data we've been discussing, and then there's what's going to happen tomorrow or what's going to happen next week, and we're trying to decide, okay, based on all this data we have, what's he going to do tomorrow, and where should I hunt? There's these different pieces of data that we can connect back to history. So back to the picture we got yesterday, or back to the pattern he had last year. How tight of a connection, or how many of these things have to line up before you were to go in there? And so the example would be, let's say you're trying to decide where to hunt the first week of October, or let's say later. We'll say the last week of October, and you have daylight pictures of him, yesterday and the day before with a certain wind speed and, good cold front kind of conditions that came passing through. Now you're saying, what should I do the next day? If the next day, if you don't have that same condition, those same set of conditions in place, do you still move on it? Or do you want to have okay, I want the same location matched up with the same conditions before I jump in there and try to kill him again?
I generally, more often than not, it's really about the weather for me. As you know, I am a slave to it. It's why we created DeerCast. I firmly believe that there are windows of opportunity each year that you're given with a daylight opportunity, and that all revolves around the weather and how close you can get to that deer's bed, depending on time of the year and how far they're moving at that time of the year. So I'm pretty disciplined when it comes to making sure it's the right opportunity, because I go back to my statement earlier saying, I never want them to know that they're being hunted. Like I don't want them to kill me, right? Like I'm trying to kill them. So in my mind, it's this me against them game of chess. And I want to be the one saying checkmate. I want to be the one. I don't want him to smell me, because to me, if a deer smells me and figures me out, like it's just dang near over every time. I don't know if you've noticed that through time, but when they get you, they got you. So don't let them get you. That should be a T-shirt. When they get you, they got you. Don't let them get you. Because, man, when they figure you out, buddy, they're a lot better. They're a lot better at this than we are. They're good at living. I say it all the time. They are good at living, and they're terrible at dying. I mean, it is hard to kill a mature deer. And if you mess up and goof him up, man alive, does it make him tougher that year and years in the future. So I'm always betting on the come in betting terms. So I'm waiting, and then I try to strike when things line up. I want optimized everything to go in there and try and kill that deer. That's just me. So, you know, other days I'm out shooting does, other days I'm filming someone, but if it's a specific target that I'm trying to hunt, I actually hunt him very few days, if that makes sense. I think back to the deer I've killed over the last few years. I've spent very few days actually where I thought I was going to kill him.
You got a target buck that shows up. You get a cell picture of him, let's say 2 days in a row with a north wind, nice, good weather. And for whatever reason, you couldn't be out hunting in this location because you went to Texas or you were somewhere else, but he's daylighting twice in a row. Day 3, totally different conditions though. Not as good. But he was daylight 2 days in a row. Are you saying
barometer drop, wind speed dropped, clouds rolled in?
Yeah.
Chances are I may not go try him. You're already behind a little bit. That's the thing. Did you ever notice about a mature buck? They seldom, almost never daylight every single day for a week, right? If you know, you'll get a day here and a day there. There's some randomness to when they daylight. And that's, again, it's another reason we did our predictive model. It's like, why? Why did he oh, there it is. You put it all together in an algorithm with 13 different variables, and we try to help people predict when the best movement's going to be, when the optimized conditions are there. So I'm trying to pick those days for me personally, and I'm using historical data that I've compiled on that deer, on that farm, on the crops, everything all combined together to go, there it is. There's the day. Here's where I'm going to try. Yeah. And you know, just try to be right more than you are wrong, but I'm still wrong a heck of a lot more than I'm right. I make a lot of bad judgments. We all are, right? You know, like in baseball, they say you're very successful if you get, you know, you bat 250, you're successful 1/4 of the time. Well, in hunting, what would it be? It was 1/100th of a time or 1/10. You know, you're batting under 100. I know that for a mature buck, you're batting way under 100.
Very low average.
It's a very low average. What do you get the whole season? Maybe a chance to 2 or 3, and that's hunting a lot. You don't get many chances. So when you take your shot, you know, you need to try have everything in your favor that you can. And that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is persistence, and the numbers game does come up. There's a do factor in everything. In fact, that night that I sat there and I saw that target in my pre-hunt interview, I talked about, I haven't had a daylight photo of this deer. I've had one in the last month. Since he shed his velvet, I had one daylight photo of him. And I said, but I believe he's here because I'm getting nighttime photos, and there is a do factor in hunting, and he's going to daylight again soon. And sure enough, he daylighted that night, and I goofed it up. I jacked it up terribly. But the do factor does come into play. But I have a locked-in freaking access. I had a perfect wind speed. I had a perfect wind direction to access it. So I felt safely that I could get there and then leave into that, what is kind of a quasi-observation set yet. I might still kill him here. Well, it worked, but I goofed it up. So there's one of my chances this year. I know that. I knew it when it happened. Got out of there. I'm like, that's one of my few opportunities I'll have. And he's a whopper, man. This deer's really, really big. And I jacked it up. I left there that night thinking I'll probably not have that chance again this year. That was my exact thoughts. So
when you have, this is off topic, but I can't help but ask, like when you have something like that happen, even someone as experienced and who's had as much success as you have, how do you like process, deal with that, and move on from it? Like how'd you handle that night, sitting in bed at home after you had this monster within range and you couldn't pull it together? What do you do?
Closer in baseball's mentality. I have a lot of baseball analogies because I watched every single pitch of every Cardinal game since I was like 10. Right, I love baseball. So closer's mentality. Really terrible memory. Get over it quickly and move on. That's the best thing you can do when it happens. Because if you wear it, if it's in your mind and it's working on you, you're going to goof the next one up and the next one up. Like you have to get over it within seconds and move on. That's all you can do. It happened. It's ancient history now. Use it to better yourself in the next situation, but eliminate emotion from making mistakes. You have to, or it will eat you up the full season. You're going to goof it up. Trust me on experience, because when I was younger, I was the dumbest hunter, man. I'd get so mad at situations because those bucks meant so much to me, right? Well, as I've aged, I've learned that you got to get over it and move on to the next opportunity. Because if you're not thinking with a clear head, you're not going to put yourself in the right position the next time. And that's kind of the mental side of the game. We're getting off topic here a little bit, but I think it is a very important part of the game, is keeping a clear head and keeping a positive attitude. I can't tell you, I'm like a very optimistic person in general. And like I learned a long time ago from a legend in our county, Paul Sexar. I was like maybe 14 or 15. And he took the time to sit down and talk to me about turkey hunting and turkey hunting tactics. And the one thing that he said in that moment, that night I had with him, he said, and it was really Joe, his brother, that pointed it out. He said, Paul hunts like he's about to kill a turkey every single second of every single hunt. And that's what kills so many. And that type of focus, so it's reality, you're talking about focus, that will help you kill more game, especially with a positive attitude. I'm going to kill him. I know I'm going to kill him. He's here tonight. And you know what, Mark? I didn't have that on October the 2nd. I mentioned before we got on the phone, I went in a little rusty. This was my only second sit of the season. And I was a little nonchalant about things that night, and it cost me a giant. I should have been ready. I should have lived by the advice that I've lived by for all these years, and I didn't. And it cost me a deer. I didn't even get my bow drawn. I was so ill prepared. And, and I've been in that situation a lot of times, but my mental game sucked that night, and it cost me a deer. So it taught me, but you know what? By the time I got to the truck, I was over it, and I was thinking about the weather for the next night's hunt. I have learned that. Like, you got to have a closer's mentality. Get over it quickly.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, speaking of your target bucks, I did want to return to a question I had related to your other target bucks. You mentioned how most of these deer are all like not homebodies. They live somewhere else, and they just occasionally come into your neck of the woods. How does your approach to patterning a deer change in that scenario? When you have a deer that is just an infrequent visitor, does anything we've talked about, is it different because of that circumstance in any way?
Deeper dive, man. Deeper dive. Find that's why I keep every picture. They're on there seldom. So every piece of the puzzle you get is so much more important than a homeboy who you get all the time, right? It's like, it's like that friend that you can see every day at the bar and go have a beer with him. You know what he's going to do, right? You know when he's going to be there. You know what he's going to say when you sit down to have the beer with him. You know what stories he's going to tell when he's had too many beers. Okay. The guy that you only see once a year, you can't wait to have that conversation. What are you going to learn new? And you're a little bit more in tune with that guy because it's something that occurs seldom. So therefore, I have files on all of these deer. I know exactly when I've had pictures of them in the past. I know what the conditions were. I know what the crop rotation was. And in fact, the deer that what I would consider my number one target, he's really, really large, but he was only on me, I think, based on what I can tell, a few hours last season. However, when the crop rotation was the same in 2020, he was on me several days. So therefore, my confidence is much higher about him this year. He is age. He was 5, 6. He's 7.5 this year. My confidence is fairly high that when he gets to my farm, if he's still alive, if he hasn't been killed by another hunter or a car or EHD or something like that, if I get him, I think he may stay enough days that I'll possibly have a shot at him. So that goes back to that environment. Crop rotation is exactly what it was in 2020, not only on my farm, but all of the surrounding area, because I look at everything when it comes to deer hunting.
Okay, so I know this is going to be situation dependent, but if we had to generalize, if you have a buck like this, do you, in this kind of case, in the world of cell cameras, are you always going to wait until you get the camera picture to say, oh, he's back?
Nope.
Or is that sometimes too late?
I want to be the camera. So I'm going to be sitting there waiting because I've never taken very many pictures of him, so I damn well better be there the day I do. So I'm going to use historical data to be there and try and be the camera, if that makes sense. So
absolutely.
Is it different type buck, different type personality? Man, if you miss your opportunity, you're out. I've got great locations. I've got great access in and out. I'm going to use them. I'm going to hunt them, and I'm going to hunt on I will take my shots on lesser weather than what I normally would on a homeboy. On a homeboy that's not leaving, I don't want to run him out. On a deer that's seldom there, I better be there when he's there. So I'm going to hunt a little more often.
Yep. Okay. What about, we've talked a lot about how patterning, can be a pretty important thing in these earlier parts of the year, but when we get into the rut, things are a little bit different. How does your approach to patterning deer change once we get into those rut phases? And do you even think you can pattern a deer during the rut?
My pattern changes. I head to Texas.
Well, there it is.
There it is. I am one of those guys that I don't want to say I hate the rut, but I much prefer hunting October and December, Bucktober and December, than I do November, because the way that I hunt, me personally, I hunt based on expectation and data points rather than hope. And when it comes to, so it's expectation rather than hope. We're real good in and around the food source. I mean, we kill a lot of deer, food source tucked close to cover. That's an equation that has worked well for Terry and I for quite a while now. When you get to November and they start spreading out and suddenly home core ranges just go like shotgun approach, it's much more difficult to run into a deer. They're chasing does and we still kill them during that period, and I still hunt them, but it gets much tougher to kill a specific deer, which is what I'm typically trying to do in November, than it is, say, in October and December.
Yeah. Does any of this stuff still apply during the rut? Like, are you gonna get annual pattern type data and say, well, I'm hunting here the second week of November and he did this thing last year? Do you ever expect that kind of stuff to repeat during that part of the year, or do those things, it's just too random?
Yeah, they still repeat. Like, different things repeat though. Like, let's fast forward out of October. Let's fast forward 30 days and go into early November. 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 3 or 4 of the best dadgum days. They're still hitting scrapes. They're still checking food sources for the first available doe. They're covering a lot more ground. So you can go back and look at that data and kill that deer doing those exact same things. When I speak of my disdain for the rut, it's really in and around once they start locking down. So 11th, 12th of November through about the 17th, 18th, that period right there is a very frustrating time for me. I would much rather be in Missouri with a rifle in my hand, or where my range is extended, or in Texas where I feel like the bucks are still doing things like they were doing here in late October, because the rut is later down there. So I kind of go south to get on a more patternable period, or I go to Missouri where we can have a good time and it's rifle season and you can stretch it out a little bit if you see a buck tending a doe, those types of things. However, just prior to lockdown and just after, absolutely you can go back and look at pictures and figure out a buck's pattern. It's just that they're covering more ground and walking more during daylight. So therefore you change where you're sitting. You're no longer sitting on a food plot, right? You're not. One of the dumbest places you can be is on a green field. I get into transition. I get into the bedroom. I start hunting mornings. I start hunting full day sits. So the tactics change drastically. But yes, you can absolutely kill a buck in his bedroom during that period of the year, especially when he ages. You take a deer, say you've been, fooled by this deer when he's 3, 4, 5, and suddenly he's 6. He may not move as much. When he's 7, when he's 8, all of a sudden he's going to daylight a little bit more. He gets hungry a little bit more often, and you can start taking advantage of his weaknesses. One of the toughest deer to kill is like a deer in his prime at age 4 and 5. They don't daylight quite as much. So 6 is also another challenging year. So you always keep in mind the age of the deer, the overall environment. But yeah, you can smoke them during the rut, before they get with the does. Once they're with the does, that's when it gets a little real challenging. And I think if you kill a deer that's tending a doe, you should really go buy a lottery ticket that day, because you probably got fairly fortunate on that day. And that's the truth. But that's where do factor comes in. That's where I'm in good country. I know he's here. I am going to spend every single solid daylight hour in a stand every single day to increase my odds. That's how you kill them once they're locked down. Just absolute seat time in the stand.
Yeah. Let's say we're after one specific buck in a scenario like you're describing. There's just the one guy that I really want to get. And we do all the things you described, that do factor, get out there, spend a lot of time, be in the general area. Is it a waste of time to chase cell camera pictures or to chase, well, he did this 2 days ago, I think I got to be in this little corner during that particular time of year, November 3rd through the 15th or something like that, specifically?
It's not a waste of time, because he's there, and that's part of the equation that time of the year. You get in the rut and you go, where's my target? I haven't had a picture of him in 6-7 days. Well, he's standing there looking at a girlfriend, So when you get a cell picture, you're like, he's still here. So that's important. Just having the deer in your hunting area is half the battle. So therefore, get in there and hunt his butt. Not having him changes that a little bit. So the rut brings about, like, if we were having this conversation, I think a lot of what I would be talking about might switch up a little bit, because right now my mind is so center focused on greener pastures, early October, food, bed, that type of stuff. If we're having this conversation November 5th, I might answer some of these things differently, but my mind's wrapped around this right now. So I'm trying to fast forward and think how I will be thinking at that time, So it's different, but I love 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th. Absolutely love it. Mornings are great. Those crisp, cool mornings. You get good weather. You got bucks walking till 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. It's pretty exciting. I mean, it can be a buck factor on certain days when you get the right weather and the right hot doe in the area. You find the magic circle and you're going to kill a deer. So it's an exciting time of the year.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you really prefer, for your style of hunting, the early part of the year and the later part of the year. So let's talk about the later part real quick. Is anything different in the late season when it comes to patterning deer compared to what we just described for that earlier stuff? Or do you go right back to the same plan?
Vastly different. It's similar plan, but vastly different strategy in terms of food source you're keying in on, and most importantly, the thermal cover you're keying in on. Where those bucks bed right now is going to be different than where they're bedding in December. Right now, they're trying to stay cool, and they've got cover everywhere because there's leaves on all the trees. Get rid of all the leaves, change the temperature by 30 or 40 degrees for a daytime high, and you've got a different system in place in terms of what the whitetail's trying to do. He's also in recovery mode as opposed to the mode he's in right now, which is eating everything he can because he's about to go crazy during the rut. So a lot of dynamics change there.
Does that change at all, though how you actually try to pattern him? Like, is the same kind of data? Like, I understand that the environmental factors are different, But when you sit down at night and try to say, okay, what's this buck going to do tomorrow? Where should I hunt tomorrow? Are you weighing things differently? Are you more confident in behaviors repeating or anything else when you're actually trying to develop that pattern in December?
I'm a little less confident in December. I think December requires a much more optimized weather occurrence than does October. October, they seem a little more patternable and a little more likely to daylight with perhaps a little less weather than in December. Man, it's got to be perfect. And again, I'm speaking in terms of not deer in general, but a target buck, like a 5, 6, 7-year-old deer. They just act different in December. They're very tired. They may all of a sudden, if there's a little secondary estrus, all of a sudden he'll go do that. So, right now in October, you don't have much of that. December, you do get a lot of it, especially if your herd's out of balance. So that comes into play. December can be tricky, but I look back at historical patterns, and I honestly I almost prefer Christmas and later. Like you take December 20th, 22nd, 23rd, somewhere in there, all the way through the end of the season, January 10th, with the right weather conditions on a major thermal block with the right food source, you're going to go in there and see a pile of deer and possibly kill your number one target.
Yeah, that does sound pretty good to me.
It sounds good right now on the high in the 80s.
It's hot out.
We can dream. We know what's in front of us, but you got to take each day as it comes. And it's exactly why we did the show 13, because so many things change throughout the season. And as they change, our tactics have to change.
Yeah. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more generally here. Again, thinking patterning deer. What is the most common or the most egregious mistake that you see other folks making when trying to pattern deer? You talk to a million deer hunters. You've been exposed to the whole community for decades now. What's that thing that you see keep on popping up that just makes you scratch your head or makes you want to, shake somebody by the shoulders and say, don't do that anymore?
I get asked this question a lot, and I answer it consistently, but I'll add to this answer in this question because of the subject matter today. People underestimate the quarry. I think whitetails are so good at living that they're almost impossible to go kill. They are so tough. And again, I'm speaking of mature bucks that have been around the block. You take a 6-year-old buck, and buddy, he's a tough son of a gun to even see during daylight. He's tough to take a picture of. He's even tougher to see. And then you got to have the capacity and the ability to kill him and then make a good shot and all the things. It's so hard to kill a giant. Okay, so you couple that with what all they've been through and the overall, health of the deer. And I think people just group deer as a deer. A buck is a buck is a buck. A deer is going to be just as healthy this year as he is next year. And I think they just lose sight of the fact of all the things that are affecting a white-tailed deer on a daily basis. Imagine what they go through on a daily basis. First of all, we're trying to kill them. Second of all, they're dealing with all these different changes. All of a sudden there's acorns everywhere one year. Next year there's none. We're going through a drought this year. You got EHD hitting them. Coyote population's up. Holy cow, I got horned in the side. I've got an infection starting. I'm older. Oh, I broke a leg. Oh, Charlie got hit by a car. I mean, there's a lot of different things that affect whitetail behavior. And I think people gloss over that and they look at every deer as a deer is a deer. And I think they are as different as people are. And I will extend this answer into a general lack of organization. If you're trying to pattern a deer, there's nothing wrong with not being organized, because I know guys that aren't, and they go out and they kill dandies every year because they're just good and their prowess is good and they're skillful. But I think people can help themselves if they have an organizational trait and they keep good notes and they keep all their pictures. We all know this guy that's got a handful of SD cards and he just went through all of them. And then he goes and puts them back in his cameras, and he never kept one picture off of one card.
That makes me cringe.
there's dust on them. They're sitting in the truck. There's soda and coffee spilt on them. You put them in the camera. They don't work. You go to the camera the next time. You didn't get any information.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that guy, right?
Yes, yes.
And I'm not knocking that guy because he's got every right to do that, as I have to be anal and obsessive over it. But I do think a general approach with more organization would help put people in better positions more often.
Yeah, yeah. Here,
do you know that guy, Mark? Point him out.
I do know that guy.
Take him by the shoulders next time you see him.
I will. I'm curious, and I don't know if there's many opportunities for you to have this happen anymore, Mark, but can you think back to the last time that you learned something from another really good deer hunter about patterning deer? So specifically about this idea of patterning deer. Is there someone you could think of who's really, really good at it? Do you have that buddy that is as good or better than you at this and that you said, oh, wow, that's a good idea, or wow, I never thought of that? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Brother Terry, we talk almost daily during the deer season, and we just compare notes. What are your deer doing? What are you seeing? I mean, it's almost like a coach's meeting or something, I mean, we just talk. And we pick up stuff from each other every day. And I love collective strategizing. So myself, Wade Perry, it is ad nauseum for our wives, Tracy, Marissa, Kyle. Like I think if they had shock collars with controls, they would buzz us every single dinner we have together during the deer season, because it is all we talk about from the moment we see each other in the morning. We're together usually 10, 12 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, deer season. But that collective thought comes to really good decision making. I do it with Terry. I do it with Wade and Perry. I do it with Josh and Carson. I do it with Matt. Grant Woods, he's the all-time GOAT as far as I'm concerned when it comes to deer behavior and the science of whitetail deer, like Bobby Culbertson, Tracker John. There's certain people in my circle that I talk to a lot, and I talk to them as much as I can so that I can pull information. I'm selfish, man. If there's something that somebody's got in his mind, I want it, because it's going to help you, and I'm happy to share it too. Like I think the more we talk and the more communication we have, the better we all get. It's why I think your podcast is so popular. You're constantly trying to teach. I think it's why, by and large, we've survived 33 years in the outdoor industry. I say it all the time. We're not very good looking. We're not very funny. We better be informational. Yeah. So I'm not saying you fit in that category, Mark. But you are. I think if you're trying to teach, and teachers learn, right? They're hungry for information. So I do it all the time, every day. I think that it's what makes us better. And also, I'm at a very interesting time in my life because I'm 55, and I think I forget as much every day as I remember. So therefore, there are things that Wade and Perry will tell me. Last year you were saying this, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. I've forgotten some of what I knew. And if people out there that are in their 50s will relate to that comment. So it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's honestly, there's a little truth to that. So I use these guys, I use their eyes and ears when we're in the blind, and I'm starting to use their mind to remind me, hey, what did we do in this situation when this occurred last time? And they have better memories than I do. So I think collective organization and collective thought is a beautiful thing, and it's going to lead you down really good paths in life, whether that be, in terms of deer hunting, or whether that be in terms of your business, or whether that is in terms of relationship. I love communication on all facets: sports, life, religion, politics, deer hunting, you name it. I'll sit and talk with anybody for hours because, man, just be the sponge out there and learn all you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that idea of collective decision making, and it's a lot of fun doing it that way, but then also I do think, like when you're trying to figure out what this buck's pattern is, you can sometimes get stuck in your own head or stuck in your own assumptions, but if you just get one other set of eyes on it, all of a sudden they might notice the one thing that you never saw there in the corner, but actually is the key to the whole thing. So talking these things out, getting other perspectives on it can help you see the larger pattern within the data sometimes. So that's such a great point.
Absolutely. Open mind, right?
Yeah.
We also know that guy. We know that guy knows everything. You're not going to tell him anything. You've met him, and don't be that guy. Don't be the guy that already knows it all. Because that's I'm learning every day. I try to figure something out new. I love that collective thought because you hit the nail on the head, man. You never know when somebody's going to bring something to the party that helps the collective group. Last night, Wade shot the deer, but we all as a group killed the deer. Yeah. There were a lot of different people that were involved in that moment, and we were all there when we recovered him. And that's every hunt in this camp. It takes a village, and one guy shoots it, but the whole village killed it. And that's why it's so important to enjoy the process going through it as you lead into the hunt, and then after the hunt, enjoy it together. That's what makes this sport so cool. You get emotions and this unbelievable range of emotions and gratitude and happiness that I can't find anywhere else in life. I've been looking, but it doesn't exist. It's right out there in the great outdoors, man. It's so cool.
It's some really, really good stuff. That's for sure. I want to tie a bow on this, Mark, with one last question. And feel free to take a second to kind of collect your thoughts on this. But if we had to create right now Mark Drury's 3 rules to successfully patterning bucks, if you had to have 3 statements, 3 things that everyone's got to keep in mind, or that the 3 rules they have to follow to become as good as you are at patterning bucks, what would those 3 final things be that we need to keep in our heads this season?
First and foremost, keep every single solid picture you can, and then study them often. So pictures are one part of the equation. Make sure that you keep them all, and then every single picture you look at, ask why, and then figure out why even that 2-year-old did what he did, and that will help you become better in the future. That's step 1. Okay. Step 2, be a slave to the weather in everything you do deer hunting. And I don't care if it's July 1st, November 1st, or February 1st. Pay attention to the weather and pay attention to what you're doing, how it affects the deer movement, how it affects your personality, your movement, and be a slave to the weather. Number 3, when it comes to patterning bucks, start taking really detailed notes about mass crop, about overall crop rotation, about hunters' habits. That's another thing you can pattern, not necessarily the deer. When's your neighbor hunting? When am I in here hunting? Am I being too patternable for this deer? So analyze yourself and your environment and everyone around you as much as you analyze the deer. If you do those 3 things and then collectively add them all up and try to create plans for the future, you're going to be a much better deer hunter and find some rewards out there that you aren't finding now.
Yeah, great advice. I love this stuff. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So thanks for humoring me, Mark, and getting on here to talk through these things. And I want to give you one last chance to tell folks where they can connect with you, where they can see all the great stuff you guys are putting out. How can they find DeerCast? What do we need to know about all those things?
Absolutely. Deercast.com, best way to get it. We've got a free version. We got a version that's just prediction. That's either $9 or $10. And now if you want your environment, a lot of things I've been talking about here today, we've got a version that's $49.99 that'll give you 1 state's plat data, or unlimited for $74.99. So we've got a price point for everybody, from free up to $75. Deercast.com is that you see everything in there. Every social post, every deer that gets killed, every deer season 22, our semi-live series, you can catch it there, or you can catch it on YouTube. Our staff is doing an amazing job bringing the stories out sometimes within hours of when the deer goes down. Or, of course, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you can find Drury Outdoors, we're there, and happy to talk to people. We've got a team of people that are just the best in the industry, in my biased opinion. I just think our team is just amazing. You take what Matt and Taylor and Josh and Carson and all our guys in St. Louis are doing, and Wade and Perry and Forrest and Ben. I mean, they are really putting some unbelievable content out there for people right now and we stay in our lane. We try to. We just stay in our deer hunting and turkey hunting lane, and we try not to get out of that. And, we try to love up on people as much as they've loved on us.
Yeah, well, you guys continue to do world-class work. I love it. I've loved it for decades. I appreciate you, Mark, and I personally appreciate you, always being willing to hop on here and chat and to answer my questions and to help so many people out. So thank you.
Absolutely, Mark. You're not the guy at the bar that I get to see every day. You're that guy I get to talk to once or twice a year, and I always love it. So thank you.
Well, I can't wait to hear some more stories from you down the road once you close the distance again on that big guy who evaded you the other night or one of these other guys. So good luck, my friend.
I appreciate you, Mark. Good luck out there. Be safe.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed that one. I hope that you, just like me, are going to be studying some trail camera photos tonight, or maybe looking back on your journal of observations and thinking, what is this son of a buck going to do? I am looking forward to it. I appreciate you. Deer season is here. This is the good stuff, my friends. I'm having a blast. I hope you are as well. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay? Every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.